Hi there. Continuing with books about special forces, we come to this book, which is an autobiography, Warrior Soul by Chuck Pfarrer. Mr. Pfarrer joined the US Navy as an officer, went through the initial training, and then in 1981 decided he wanted to be a SEAL and applied for BUDS, basic underwater demolition slash SEAL training. And this training, it's well known. Almost everybody who writes a book about the SEALs focuses on BUDS. It's notorious, and rightly so. It's certainly one of the most severe tests in any military, anywhere. And one of the things he says is that these men who all remained, of the perhaps 300 who had requested to attend SEAL training, before this group had undergone a single day of instruction, the number of volunteers had been culled by two-thirds. During pre-training, prospective students had been investigated, inspected, jabbed with needles, placed in hyperbaric chambers, and quizzed by shrinks. The tests washed out claustrophobics and those afraid of heights, the overly aggressive and the passive, people without perfect vision or hearing, those with trick knees, flat feet, colour blindness, or heart murmurs, people with allergies, and those with criminal or juvenile records. 145 men had been judged by the Navy to have the physical, academic, and psychological qualifications necessary to undergo SEAL training. They would start basic underwater demolition SEAL Class 114. The course we were about to undertake was declared by the Department of Defense to be physically and mentally demanding. So he sets the scene well there. Obviously, Hell Week is the most severe part for most people, and it was designed to replicate the stress of D-Day, where the four runners of SEALs um, were doing beach recons prior to the landing. Anyway, so he passes, goes through jump school, and which he describes very humorously, and goes to SEAL Team 4 on the East Coast. And there he starts. One of the things he does is they have to recover some rocket equipment from a NASA launch that's landed in the ocean while they're being harassed by a Russian ship. And the Russians are after this piece of kit, and they've got to drop into the water and secure it before the Russians can get it. And then he does operations in South America, Panama, or Central America, Panama, Honduras, etc., and then Beirut, where there was a lot of action at that time. Although, to be honest, and this comes through in a lot of similar books written by people from the American Special Operations side, prior to 9/11, they didn't really uh, get a lot in the way of operations. Sometimes they were spun up for an op and never came off, but there wasn't that much for the Americans to do. Carter and then Clinton were very risk averse, and they they didn't really commit the forces too much. Mogadishu uh, being the example which proves the case that they supposed to be a humanitarian operation turned into a disaster, and it kind of put the stamp on any, or the block on any further operations. Anyway, so he decides to um, go for SEAL Team 6, which he's obviously heard about, and there is a process of interview that he has to do first before anything else. In the admin office, I was fingerprinted and photographed and signed several security agreements. I was then escorted to a medium-sized room off the operations department. Behind the desk was a man with dark hair and a full mustache. He could have passed for an older Tom Selleck. There were 5 or 6 big dudes scattered on a couch and a couple of chairs. They all had shoulder-length hair. He's told to sit. Turns out to be the commanding officer, Bob Gormley, who had recently taken over from the founder, Marcinko. So he starts asking him questions. Do you know who I am? Since you have your feet on the desk, I assume you're the skipper. The mouth under the moustache smiled a little. I was prepared to get torn into, and it started pretty much right away. The smile disappeared and Gormley's eyes narrowed. You're at 4, yes, sir. How'd you get along with Skippy? How'd you get along with Skippy? Someone behind me asked. I didn't turn round and kept my eyes on Captain Gormley. If I wasn't getting along with him, I wouldn't mention it here. Then he's asked a few other questions and so on, operations he's on and so on. Gormley closed the folder on his desk. That's enough, he said. I stood, nodded, and turned for the door. As I opened it, one of the guys on the couch unfolded his arms. You drink? He asked. I've been known to. You ever go to the Raven? He asked. The Raven was SEAL Team 6's bar. It wasn't off limits to the other teams, but they'd staked it out. It was almost like their sovereign territory. I haven't been lately, I answered. Someone else leaned forward. Why not? I heard it went gay, I said. No one said anything. I walked out. And he passes that interview and is put through the SEAL selection course for SEAL Team 6, which is called Green Team. And I had been issued an astonishing amount of stuff. Foul weather gear, Gore-Tex parkas, assault vests, camis, boots, fins, bags and sea chests full to bursting, climbing harnesses, carabiners, chocks, Jumars and lockpicks, Nomex coveralls, custom wetsuits, flight suits, survival kits, sunglasses and ski goggles, scuba rigs, a pair of twin steel 90s for open circuit, and a brand new Dragolar 5 rebreather, an MT-1X parachute, and an impressive number of weapons. In my personal rack in the arsenal were a Car-15 with M203 grenade launcher, an MP5A5 and an MP5K machine pistols, and a wicked little silenced MP5SD. I had a personal AK-47, an H&K G3 assault rifle, and an M60 machine gun, an SAW squad automatic weapon, a stainless steel Smith & Wesson Model 686 357, a Beretta 92, and a blue steel Volta PPK, just like James Bond. The armory tech was blasé as he had me sign. This is just your basic drawer, he mumbled. If you need any other sort of weapon, or if you want any modifications made, just let me know. So he goes through the green team training under a guy called Trailer Court, who was an ensign, who was well known for his physical abilities. He was a climber, and he describes the training in some detail and also the security. There are 2 guys from the security department who brief them on the restrictions for both OPSEC and PERSEC, and the fact that and they're being scrutinized all the time, and their neighbors will be questioned and so on. And if anybody reveals that they know that they're in a SEAL team, uh, let alone at 6, uh, they will be shown the door. And they're told not to fraternize with their old buddies from the previous commands. So he graduates Green Team and is assigned to an assault team. And as I said earlier, there's not much going on. But one of the operations that does come up, real world up, is the Achille Lauro, where Palestinian terrorists took over a cruise liner and it was an Italian ship, but it had a mixed um, passenger list, and they murdered an American passenger. He was disabled. He was in a wheelchair, and he was Jewish, and he was murdered. And so this was exactly the operations that SEAL Team 6 had envisaged when they were created by Mosinko, which was maritime hostage rescue. And that they spun up and off they went. They flew off to Italy, Sigonella Airbase. However, the Navy couldn't locate the cruise line, and then it sailed into Egypt, and they surrendered to the Egyptians. And so the SEALs were stood down, but then uh, they were flying. Uh, the terrorists were being flown on an Egyptian 737 aircraft, and they were intercepted by Tomcats by the U.S. Navy and forced to land at Sigonella. SEAL teams were routed back, and they surrounded the aircraft, and there was a standoff. Uh, Unfortunately, the Italians decided to get involved and wouldn't allow the terrorists to be captured. And they said they would imprison them, but they eventually released them. They were playing some sort of political game. So it turned out that they were, you know, there really wasn't a decent resolution to it. And another op he was involved in was in a port he doesn't specify out in the Middle East, where they're basically doing force protection for U.S. warship, and there's a fast fishing boat uh, which was rather acting suspiciously, so they intercepted, and the locals were armed. They had AKs and so on. They take them prisoner and hand them over to a guy turns up from the U.S. Embassy, who was obviously CIA, together with some local security people, and the guys are taken away probably to be connected to the national grid and questioned. And the last thing he does with SEAL Team 6 is an exercise um, which actually takes place on the day he's leaving the Navy, where they do an insertion from a civilian passenger aircraft. And this is a method of insertion that special operations people work on. And the idea is to fly a route that's the same profile as a civilian airline flight, and then to free fall using an offset, so you can travel many, many miles, uh, maybe across a mountain screen or across a border or whatever. And the aircraft that they use is a Boeing 727. And the reason being is it has a rear entrance door, which is a ramp, and you can free fall off the ramp. And so they're practicing this. They take off from a civilian airport, fly a circuit, and then parachute onto a naval base. And he describes how you have to get a big heavy guy to jump on the ramp to get it down, because it won't just open hydraulically with the airflow. Really interesting description of how it's done. And that was his final operation or final exercise in the Navy. He then becomes a screenwriter in Hollywood, and he wrote the screenplay for the film Navy SEALs, starring Charlie Sheen. And it's not a very accurate film, shall we say. Fairly entertaining, and I've seen Andy Stump, for example, uh, did a really good analysis of it, pointing out all the mistakes in it. But it's Hollywood, so and I know one of the films that were written at this time did have a scene where they do an insertion from a 727, and it's almost exactly as written in the book. So yeah, Warrior Soul, interesting book, and it's about a time in the Navy SEALs, just post Marsenko, SEAL Team 6, following on into the reign of Bob Gormley and so on, how the command had developed then. So interesting read.